My parents secretly gave my $15,000 college fund to my sister. Now, karma's hitting hard. Ever feel like your family's playing favorites, and you're not it? Like you're living in some twisted reality show where the prize is basic human decency, and you're constantly getting voted off the island? That's my life. I'm Chloe, 20, and this is how my parents, Richard and Susan, used the inheritance my grandmother, Nana Rose, left me specifically for college to fund my younger sister Bethany's third failed business venture, and how their carefully constructed world of favoritism and lies came crashing down around them, thanks to a little thing called karma. My grandmother, Nana Rose, bless her soul, was the only one in my immediate family who seemed to see me, to acknowledge me as a person with thoughts, feelings, and dreams. My parents, Richard and Susan? They've always been utterly, hopelessly obsessed with my younger sister, Bethany. Bethany is 19, and she's, well, let's just say she's the living, breathing embodiment of the word entitled. She's never worked a day in her life, expects everything to be handed to her on a silver platter, and has the emotional maturity of a particularly spoiled toddler. My parents? They're her enablers, classic narcissistic types who thrive on control and manipulation. They've always treated me like an afterthought, a burden, a convenient source of free labor and emotional punching bag. Bethany, though? She's their golden child, their princess, the sun around which their entire universe revolves. Growing up, I was practically invisible. It wasn't just that Bethany got more things, it was the way she got them. New clothes? Bethany got a shopping spree, while I got her hand-me-downs, often stained, ripped, or hopelessly out of style. My childhood photos are a mortifying parade of Bethany's discarded outfits, a constant visual reminder of my second-class status. The latest gadgets? Bethany got the newest phone, the coolest game console, while I was stuck with her old, cracked screen cast-offs. Birthday parties? Bethany had elaborate themed parties with dozens of guests, bouncy castles, and mountains of presents. I got a cake from the grocery store and maybe a couple of friends over, if I was lucky. It wasn't even about the material possessions, really. It was the message, the constant, insidious message that Bethany was valuable, worthy of love and attention, while I was not. I was an inconvenience, a drain on their resources, someone to be tolerated but never truly cherished. My mom even had this infuriating line she'd use, delivered with a saccharine sweet smile that made my skin crawl. Don't be greedy, Chloe. Sharing is caring. Right, sharing my future, my opportunities, my inheritance with Bethany was apparently caring. It was emotional gaslighting at its finest. The food situation was another, equally soul-crushing nightmare. Every meal, every single meal, was meticulously tailored to Bethany's, extremely picky and ever-changing, tastes. We're talking about a girl who would throw a tantrum if her chicken nuggets weren't the exact right shade of golden brown. If I dared to complain, to express even the slightest preference for something different? Punishment. Swift, harsh, and utterly disproportionate. One time, I refused to eat Bethany's favorite, some truly awful tuna casserole that smelled like old gym socks, and I was grounded for a week and had to do everyone's laundry, including Bethany's, by hand. Another time, I asked for spaghetti for my birthday dinner, and my mom made Bethany's favorite lasagna instead, claiming that it's basically the same thing, just with different noodles. My mom's twisted logic, the justification she used for this blatant favoritism, was even more bizarre. She claimed that her older brother had been spoiled rotten by their parents, and she was determined to correct that injustice by spoiling her younger child and neglecting her older one. She saw herself as some kind of avenging angel, righting the wrongs of her own childhood by inflicting them on me. Make it make sense. The hypocrisy was staggering. She'd complain endlessly about how she had been treated unfairly, how she had never gotten what she wanted, and then she'd turn around and do the exact same thing to me. My escape, my lifeline, my only source of genuine love and affection, was my grandmother, Nana Rose. She lived on a small, picturesque ranch about an hour outside of town, and I started spending summers with her after I finished middle school. It was heaven on earth. She actually listened to me, asked me about my interests, bought me things I liked, treated me like a valuable, intelligent, and capable human being. Nana Rose had horses, beautiful, majestic creatures that I instantly adored. I learned to ride, to groom them, to care for them, and I discovered a passion I never knew I had. Those summers spent with Nana Rose, riding through fields of wildflowers, breathing in the fresh country air, were the only time I felt truly happy, truly free. When it was time to start high school, I begged, pleaded, and practically got down on my knees to convince my parents to let me go to the small, rural school near Nana Rose's ranch. My parents, thrilled at the prospect of having me out of their hair, surprisingly agreed. It was the best decision I ever made, a decision that probably saved my sanity. I moved in with Nana Rose, helped her with chores around the ranch, attended the local high school, and finally felt like I belonged somewhere. I had friends, I excelled in my classes, and I had Nana Rose, who loved me unconditionally. Then, in my junior year, Nana Rose got sick. It started with a persistent cough, then fatigue, then a gradual decline that was heartbreaking to witness. She knew she didn't have much time left, so she called a family meeting to read her will. It was a somber occasion, filled with tension and barely concealed greed. She left the ranch to a cousin, a kind and hard-working man who had helped her out for years. She left some money to various animal charities, a cause close to her heart. And then, she addressed me. She left $15,000 specifically for my college education, money she had carefully saved over the years. She made me promise, her voice weak but firm, that I would go to college, that I would pursue my dreams, that I wouldn't let anyone stand in my way. My mom was furious. Openly, visibly furious. She thought she should get more, that it wasn't fair that I was getting such a large sum of money. Nana Rose, ever the sharp one, even in her weakened state, reminded my mom, in front of everyone, that she had already given Richard a significant sum of money years ago to help with a supposed business opportunity, which, of course, had failed miserably, thanks to his incompetence and laziness. The room went silent. My dad looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. A few months later, Nana Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep. It broke my heart into a million pieces. I felt like I had lost my anchor, my protector, the one person in the world who truly loved me. I had to move back in with my parents, and it was instantly, predictably awful. The atmosphere in the house was thick with resentment, my mom's bitterness palpable. When it was time to start applying for colleges, I, naively, assumed that accessing the $15,000 would be a straightforward process. I asked my parents about it, expecting them to help me with the paperwork, to guide me through the process. Instead, I was met with a wall of evasion, of shifty-eyed glances and mumbled excuses. They changed the subject, they pretended they didn't hear me, they acted like I was being unreasonable for even bringing it up. Finally, after weeks of me persistently demanding answers, my mom, cornered and seething with barely suppressed rage, admitted the truth. They had given the money, my money, the money Nana Rose had explicitly left for my education, to Bethany to start another one of her ridiculous, doomed to fail business ventures. This time, it was a luxury dog grooming service, despite the fact that Bethany is terrified of dogs and has never shown the slightest interest in animals. I was livid. Absolutely, incandescently furious. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, betrayed in the most profound way possible. That money was mine, earmarked for my future, my education. It was my ticket out of that toxic household, my chance to build a life for myself. They tried to gaslight me, to manipulate me, to make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. They said I was too young for college, despite the fact that I was the same age as every other student applying, that Bethany needed it more, that I could always go to college later. I snapped. Years of pent-up anger, resentment, and frustration finally boiled over. I screamed at them, I called them out on their lies, their favoritism, their utter disregard for my well-being. I asked them, my voice shaking with rage, why Bethany couldn't wait a year. What was I supposed to do? Work at the local grocery store for the rest of my life? Abandon my dreams because Bethany wanted to play entrepreneur? Update 1. Things escalated quickly, predictably, and dramatically. My parents, instead of showing even a shred of remorse, doubled down on their cruelty. They called me ungrateful, selfish, a spoiled brat. My mom even had the audacity to accuse me of not appreciating everything they had done for me. Everything they had done for me? Like what? Provide me with the bare minimum of food and shelter, while showering Bethany with every conceivable luxury? Like making me feel like a worthless burden my entire life? Bethany, naturally, joined in the fray, gleefully fanning the flames of conflict. She started spreading vicious rumors about me, telling everyone that I was jealous of her entrepreneurial spirit and that I was trying to sabotage her business. My aunt, my dad's sister, a kind woman who had always been sympathetic to my plight, told me that Bethany was telling everyone I was a gold digger who was only after Nana Rose's money. That was it. That was the final straw. I told my mom, in no uncertain terms, that if they didn't return the money, my money, I would expose their theft, their blatant disregard for Nana Rose's wishes, to the entire family and anyone else who would listen. My mom's response was chilling. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes and said, "Fine. Then start paying rent. And groceries. And for every single thing we've ever spent on you. We'll calculate it all, every penny, and you can pay us back before you get a dime of that money. The sheer audacity, the breathtaking cruelty of that statement, left me speechless. They were still fully supporting Bethany, who, by the way, had dropped out of community college twice and had zero job prospects, zero ambition, and zero interest in contributing anything to the household. My parents always made excuses for her. She's just finding herself. She's a free spirit. She's not cut out for traditional work, while I, who excelled in school, who worked hard, who dreamed of a better future, got nothing but criticism, neglect, and outright hostility. For context, and to fully illustrate Bethany's utter incompetence, let's delve into her previous business ventures. The first was a custom jewelry line, which consisted of her buying cheap beads and plastic trinkets from the craft store and gluing them onto equally cheap metal findings. She sold a few pieces to her friends, declared herself a successful entrepreneur, and then promptly lost interest. The second was a life coaching service, despite the fact that she had absolutely zero qualifications, zero life experience, and the emotional intelligence of a goldfish. She created a website filled with generic platitudes and stock photos, charged exorbitant fees, and then wondered why no one signed up. Both businesses failed spectacularly, within months, and my parents bailed her out every single time, without a word of criticism or complaint. I was desperate. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. I didn't know what to do, where to turn. Then, I remembered Nana Rose's lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I found his number in Nana Rose's old, leather-bound address book, a relic from a happier time. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. I explained the situation, my voice cracking with emotion, and he listened patiently, his voice calm and reassuring. He confirmed, unequivocally, that I had a legal right to the $15,000, that it was a specific bequest in Nana Rose's will, and that my parents had absolutely no legal right to withhold it from me. He said he would send my parents a formal demand letter, outlining their legal obligations and demanding the immediate return of the money. Update 2. The demand letter arrived, delivered by certified mail, a thick, official-looking envelope that sent my parents into a tailspin of panic and rage. And, just as many of you predicted in the comments of my previous posts, my parents kicked me out. My mom, her face contorted with fury, screamed at me, called me a snake, a traitor, an ungrateful wretch, and a litany of other insults that I won't repeat here. She threw my clothes, my meager possessions, out onto the lawn, scattering them across the overgrown grass. I had, stupidly, foolishly, left some of my things at their house, believing, against all evidence, that they might still have a shred of decency left. I should have known better. I should have moved out sooner. I had already started talking to a friend, Sarah, about sharing an apartment, and I had a part-time job at a local bakery, a job that paid minimum wage but at least offered free pastries and day-old bread. My mom, in a theatrical display of performative victimhood, claimed that I owed them hundreds of thousands of dollars for raising me. She even pulled out a spiral-bound notebook and, with a flourish, started calculating my expenses, literally charging me for a portion of their mortgage payments, their utility bills, their grocery bills, and even the cost of the hand-me-down clothes I had been forced to wear my entire childhood. It was insane, a grotesque parody of accounting, a desperate attempt to justify their theft and their cruelty. I left, numb with shock and disbelief, tears streaming down my face. I found a bus stop, sat on the cold metal bench, and waited. I took the bus to Nana Rose's ranch, now owned by my cousin, David, the kind and hard-working man who had inherited it. I explained the situation to him, my voice choked with emotion, and he welcomed me with open arms, offering me a place to stay for as long as I needed. I found Nana Rose's lawyer's number again, in that same worn address book, and called him, my hands trembling. He assured me that we could sue, that we had a strong case, that my parents' actions were not only morally reprehensible but also legally indefensible. He said the deadline for my parents to respond to the demand letter was rapidly approaching. Bethany, in a final act of petty cruelty, called me, gloating that my parents would never give me the money, that I couldn't afford a lawyer, that I was powerless against them. I hung up on her, my heart pounding in my chest. Update 3. I sued my parents. It was the hardest, most agonizing decision I've ever made, but they left me no choice. They had stolen my inheritance, my future, my chance at a better life. They had ignored the lawyer's demand letter, clinging to their delusion that they could get away with it. I went to their house, one last time, hoping against hope that I could reason with them, that I could appeal to some shred of decency, some flicker of parental love that might still exist within them. It was a disaster. They attacked me, verbally and even physically. My mom, her eyes blazing with hatred, screamed at me, calling me every vile name she could think of. She threw a vase at me, a heavy ceramic thing that shattered against the wall, narrowly missing my head. I had left some of my belongings at the house, non-essential items that I thought I would pick up later, when things had calmed down. My mom took them from my closet, my old journals, my favorite books, my childhood stuffed animals, and she ripped them, tore them, smashed them, right in front of me, a deliberate act of cruelty designed to inflict maximum pain. I told my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, to proceed with the lawsuit. I gave him all the details, the evidence, the documentation. When my parents received the court summons, a thick packet of legal documents outlining the charges against them, they finally panicked. My dad, his voice trembling, called me, suddenly wanting to settle things amicably, to work things out as a family. Too late, the ship had sailed. The time for amicable settlements had passed. The court ordered my dad to pay me the $15,000, the full amount of my inheritance. He claimed, predictably, that he didn't have it, that he was broke, that he couldn't possibly afford to pay such a large sum of money. He offered to pay in installments, a paltry sum each month that wouldn't even cover my basic living expenses, let alone my tuition. My lawyer argued, forcefully and persuasively, that this was completely unacceptable, that it wasn't sufficient to cover my tuition, my housing, my food, and my other necessary expenses. The judge, after listening to both sides, ruled in my favor. He ordered my dad to cover my tuition, my housing, my food, and other necessary expenses, up to a minimum of $7,500 per semester. If my expenses were lower, he'd pay the actual amount. If they were higher, I'd cover the difference. It wasn't ideal, far from it. I didn't want to be financially dependent on my parents, on the people who had caused me so much pain. But it was a compromise, a temporary solution. My dad, tears streaming down his face, begged me to agree, promising, swearing on his mother's grave, that he wouldn't default, that he would make the payments on time. I warned him, my voice cold and hard, that if he or my mom caused any more trouble, if they harassed me, if they threatened me, if they tried to contact me in any way, I would sue them again, this time for emotional distress, for harassment, for every single thing they had ever done to me. My mom and Bethany, meanwhile, continued their relentless smear campaign, telling everyone who would listen that I was a greedy, ungrateful daughter who was destroying the family, that I was a monster who was trying to bankrupt my parents. The irony, the sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy of it all, was almost comical. Bethany, the serial failure, the perpetual disappointment, the one who had caused far more damage to the family's reputation than I ever could, was now portraying herself as the victim. Update 4. I graduated high school at the very top of my class, valedictorian, a testament to my hard work and determination, despite the constant obstacles my parents had placed in my path. I sent my parents graduation invitations, knowing, with a certainty that bordered on despair, that they wouldn't come. They had never shown the slightest interest in my academic achievements, never attended a single parent-teacher conference, never acknowledged a single accomplishment. To my utter shock, my dad showed up. He stood at the back of the auditorium, awkward and uncomfortable, his eyes red-rimmed. After the ceremony, he approached me, hesitantly, and, for the first time in my entire life, he told me he was proud of me. It took a lawsuit, a court order, the threat of financial ruin, but he finally acknowledged me, his daughter. It doesn't really matter anymore. The damage is done. The words are hollow. I moved into the university dorms, a small, cramped room that felt like a palace compared to the toxic environment I had left behind. The court-ordered payments from my dad, grudgingly made, covered my basic expenses, tuition, housing, a meal plan. I got a part-time job at a campus bookstore and tutored other students in math and science to make extra money, to buy textbooks, to afford the occasional coffee, to feel like a normal college student. I'm doing well, academically. I'm thriving, despite everything. My relationship with my dad is better. It's a fragile, tentative truce, built on a foundation of legal obligation and mutual distrust. But he was a passive bystander my entire life, a silent accomplice to my mom's cruelty. He saw how she treated me, he witnessed the injustice, the inequality, the blatant favoritism, and he did nothing. He never stood up for me, never defended me, never challenged my mom's twisted logic. He even agreed with her, justifying her actions, claiming that she was saving money, that she was teaching me a lesson, that I was being difficult. As for Bethany's many dramas, and there were many, I tried to distance myself from them, to focus on my own life, my own future. But it was difficult to completely escape the fallout. I know, from snippets of information gleaned from relatives and social media, that her dog grooming business failed. Shocking, I know, given her complete lack of business acumen and her intense dislike of animals. She got arrested for arguing with a police officer, a truly embarrassing incident that involved her screaming obscenities and resisting arrest. My mom had to bail her out, yet another financial burden on my parents. Finally, after years of enabling Bethany's irresponsible behavior, my dad gave my mom an ultimatum: Bethany or him. My mom, who doesn't work, who has no marketable skills, who is completely dependent on my dad for financial support, chose my dad. Bethany was kicked out, again, and is supposedly living with a friend, a temporary arrangement that is almost certainly doomed to fail. Update 5, bonus update. You guessed it. The predictable happened. The cycle of abuse continued. My dad stopped making the court-ordered payments. We're going back to court. Apparently, Bethany, the prodigal daughter, moved back in with my parents. Her friend's situation, unsurprisingly, didn't work out. My dad, weak and easily manipulated, is back to doing whatever my mom tells him to do, prioritizing Bethany's needs over mine, despite the court order, despite the legal consequences, despite everything. I can't believe it. I truly, naively, believed that things might be different, that my dad might have finally learned his lesson. My mom and Bethany, emboldened by my dad's renewed support, have ramped up their online attacks, posting increasingly vicious and defamatory lies about me on social media, even going so far as to claim that I caused Nana Rose's death, because supposedly caring for me, spending time with me, loving me, stressed her out and hastened her demise. She was an elderly woman with pre-existing health conditions. The cruelty, the sheer, unadulterated malice, is staggering. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, says we can sue for breach of contract, for defamation, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. He's confident that we can win, that we can hold them accountable for their actions. I'm hoping it costs them way more than the original $15,000 this time. I want them to feel the consequences of their choices, to understand the pain they have inflicted. Update 6. This might not be a happy ending in the traditional sense, a fairy tale resolution where everyone lives happily ever after. But it is a happy ending for me, a victory, a testament to my resilience, my strength, my determination to overcome adversity. We went back to court. We sued for the remaining balance of the original agreement, plus interest, plus damages for breach of contract. The judge, disgusted by my parents' blatant disregard for the previous court order, ruled in my favor. He ordered the seizure of their house, their primary asset, the symbol of their middle-class respectability. The sale of the house will cover what they owe me, plus additional costs and legal fees, totaling around $87,000. But that's not all. The defamation lawsuit, a separate but equally important legal battle, added another $25,000 to their debt, including compensation for the years of emotional abuse I endured, for the destruction of my personal property, for the relentless online harassment, for everything they had put me through. My mom completely lost it. She was already teetering on the edge of sanity, a woman consumed by bitterness, resentment, and a pathological need to control everyone around her. But this, the loss of her house, the public humiliation, the financial ruin, pushed her over the edge. She showed up at my university, unannounced, unhinged, a wild look in her eyes. Bethany was with her, lurking in the background, a silent, smirking accomplice. My mom started screaming at me, in the middle of the campus quad, in front of dozens of students and faculty members. She accused me of ruining her life, of destroying her family, of being a heartless, ungrateful monster. It quickly escalated from a verbal assault to a physical confrontation. Campus security intervened, 2 burly guards who tried to restrain her. She fought them, kicking, scratching, biting, screaming obscenities. She elbowed one of the guards in the nose, drawing blood. She punched the other guard in the stomach. Finally, the police arrived, sirens wailing, and took her away, handcuffing her and dragging her, kicking and screaming, to the police car. My sister, Bethany, witnessed the entire scene, but she didn't intervene, didn't try to stop her mother, didn't offer a word of apology or remorse. She simply stood there, a smug expression on her face, watching as her mother was arrested. This incident, this public display of violence and instability, strengthened my case immeasurably and resulted in a restraining order against my mom, barring her from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my residence or my university. My dad? We have no relationship. None. He chose his wife, his abuser, over his daughter, his victim. He made his choice, and he will have to live with the consequences. The good news? The truly wonderful, life-affirming good news? I have the money to finish my education, to earn my degree, to build a life for myself, a life free from the toxic influence of my parents and my sister. I'm still working part-time, I'm still tutoring, I'm still saving every penny I can. Things are finally looking up. I'm finally free.